Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth. Not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast. Hosted by Seth Andrews.
It sounds like a cliche when you say it. This person changed my life. But in my case, without hyperbole, without any exaggeration, it's absolutely true. Christopher Hitchens changed my life. And I will forever be grateful. It was 10 years ago this week that we lost Hitch to esophageal cancer. I've actually been planning on doing this broadcast for a long time. And most of what you're going to hear is Hitch's voice. I have sort of harvested clips from various presentations and speeches and debates. In fact, it was a debate between Christopher Hitchens and Rabbi Shmuley Botiek at the 92nd Street Y that helped to propel me on my own journey. It's not that I was speaking in Hitch's voice. It's like he gave me the permission, the encouragement to go out and speak in my own voice, and it changed my life. So let's start there. This is a soundbite from that debate at the 92nd Street Y in New York City back from 2008 as Christopher Hitchens talks about the perniciousness of religion. The clip runs about 3.5 minutes.
I prefer to argue, and I do in my book, that the belief in a supreme being or creator is actually a pernicious belief that does a great moral and intellectual damage to our poorly evolved primate species. And I'm hoping that we will, in the course of this evening, get to the point about the ill effect of religion, but I'm not going to duck the obligation imposed upon me by the motion before us, which is to give the reasons why we're so lucky as to be furnished with so little evidence for such a horrible proposition. And falsity, after all, is a subdivision of perniciousness. Religion, however, does stand, having started in that pejorative manner, does in a way stand to our credit. We are, after all, imperfectly evolved primate mammals though we are, and aware of our kinship with other such creatures. We do have the gift of pattern seeking in our minds, and we will pursue this gift, often at our own expense, but at great hazard and often with great ingenuity. That has a plus side and a minus side. It very often means, you'll have observed it in your own lives and those of others, that we prefer a junk explanation to no explanation at all, or a conspiracy theory to no theory. And religion takes its place in our evolution in this precise manner. It's the first and worst explanation we came up with. It's the best we could do when we didn't know we lived on a cooling planet with big fissures in its crust. When we didn't know there were microorganisms that had power over us, we didn't have dominion over them. To the contrary. When we didn't know we lived on a spherical planet, we didn't know we revolved around other spherical bodies, everything was terrifying, new, mysterious, and often lethal. It was our first attempt at philosophy in that way, first attempt at cosmology, first attempt at geography, biology, all the rest of it. A hopeless attempt belonging to the bawling, fearful, ignorant childhood of our species, but very necessary. And it possesses still the advantage of having come first. The terrible advantage over the mind and over learning that it possesses is its originality. And the history of human emancipation is the struggle to get away from this terrifying, foolish, ignorant first try. And I can see we have still some distance to travel, but we have made a start. Now, you can argue it because it's still here. We know a little bit, of course. We don't now think that the Aztecs were really on to something. We don't think that all faith-based is better than none. We don't think you need to wrench a living heart out of a chest cavity to make the sun come up every day. We've been through the list of gods. It's in my edited collection, The Portable Atheist. Mencken actually drew up a list of very nearly 10,000 gods that used to be worshipped and aren't anymore. As my friend Richard Dawkins says, everyone's an atheist. Nobody believes in the sun god Ra anymore. Nobody believes in Huitzilopochtli anymore. Nobody believes in Juno and Venus anymore. You're all atheists as far as that's concerned, and you look with pity on those who support or ever did such cults. All we say is, make it consistent. Just go one god more, and you're nearly there.
Again, I've got the link for that entire exchange and all the links for every soundbite in the description box of the broadcast. Christopher Hitchens was born April the 13th, 1949 in Portsmouth, England. He studied at the Leys School of Cambridge and graduated from Balliol College at Oxford. He had degrees in philosophy, politics, and economics. He graduated in 1970. He immediately became the firebrand commentator that we all came to know and love. On political issues specifically at first, he wrote for liberal publications like The Nation. It was back in 1989 his friend and author Salman Rushdie received death threats from Islamist radicals over Rushdie's book called The Satanic Verses. Christopher Hitchens publicly came to Rushdie's defense, and then he chastised his fellow liberals for not doing the same, for being cowards in the shadow of Islamic terrorist threats. Hitch started writing for Vanity Fair in 1992. Throughout his life and career, Hitchens wrote extensively about George Orwell. He wrote biographies of Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson. In 2007, he gained international attention with a book called God Is Not Great: How Religion Poisons Everything. And in 2010, he published his own life story in a memoir called Hitch 22. It was during that book tour for Hitch 22 that Christopher Hitchens was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. 80% of people diagnosed with esophageal cancer die within 5 years of the diagnosis. Christopher Hitchens did not make it past year number 2. He succumbed to pneumonia December the 15th, 2011 at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. At his request, his body was donated to medical research for the cause of advancing science and public health. Christopher Hitchens was 62 years old. He describes his cancer, or the discovery of his cancer, in Chapter 1 of the book Mortality. In Hitch's words, he said, "I have more than once in my time woken up feeling like death. But nothing prepared me for the early morning in June when I came to consciousness feeling as if I were actually shackled to my own corpse. The whole cave of my chest and thorax seemed to have been hollowed out and then refilled with slow-drying cement. I could faintly hear myself breathe, but could not manage to inflate my lungs. My heart was beating either much too much or much too little. Any movement, however slight, required forethought and planning. It took strenuous effort for me to cross the room of my New York hotel and summon the emergency services. They arrived with great dispatch and behaved with immense courtesy and professionalism. I had time to wonder why they needed so many boots and helmets and so much heavy backup equipment. But now that I view the scene in retrospect, I see it as a very gentle and firm deportation, taking me from the country of the well across the stark frontier that marks off the land of malady. Within a few hours, having had to do quite a lot of emergency work on my heart and lungs, the physicians at this sad border post had shown me a few other postcards from the interior and told me that my immediate next stop would have to be with an oncologist. Some kind of shadow was throwing itself across the negatives. The previous evening, I'd been launching my latest book at a successful event in New Haven. The night of the terrible morning, I was supposed to go on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart and then appear at a sold-out event at the 92nd Street Y on the Upper East Side in conversation with Salman Rushdie. My very short-lived campaign of denial took this form. I would not cancel these appearances or let down my friends or miss the chance of selling a stack of books. I managed to pull off both gigs without anyone noticing anything amiss, though I did vomit 2 times, with an extraordinary combination of accuracy, neatness, violence, and profusion, just before each show. This is what citizens of the sick country do while they are still hopelessly clinging to their old domicile. The new land is quite welcoming in its way. Everybody smiles encouragingly, and there appears to be absolutely no racism. A generally egalitarian spirit prevails, and those who run the place have obviously gotten where they are on merit and hard work. As against that, the humor is a touch feeble and repetitive. There seems to be almost no talk of sex, and the cuisine is the worst of any destination I've ever visited. The country has a language of its own, a lingua franca that manages to be both dull and difficult, and that contains names like ondansetron for anti-nausea medication, as well as some unsettling gestures that require a bit of getting used to. For example, an official met for the first time may abruptly sink his fingers into your neck. That's how I discovered that my cancer had spread to my lymph nodes, and that one of these deformed beauties, located on my right clavicle or collarbone, was big enough to be seen and felt. It's not at all good when your cancer is palpable from the outside, especially when, as at this stage, they didn't even know where the primary source was. Carcinoma works cunningly from the inside out. Detection and treatment often work more slowly and gropingly from the outside in. Many needles were sunk into my clavicle area. Tissue is the issue, being a hot slogan in the local Tumorville tongue, and I was told the biopsy results might take a week. Working back from the cancer-ridden squamous cells that these first results disclosed, it took rather longer than that to discover the disagreeable truth. The word metastasized was the one in the report that first caught my eye and ear. The alien had colonized a bit of my lung, as well as quite a bit of my lymph node, and its original base of operations had been located for quite some time in my esophagus. My father had died, and very swiftly too, of cancer of the esophagus. He was 79. I am 61. In whatever kind of race life may be, I have very abruptly become a finalist. It was many years before his death. In fact, it looks like it may have been around the year 2000 or so. Christopher Hitchens did a man-on-the-street thing. Somebody had a camera and asked him about fear and life and death and free will. And it's interesting to hear his views on life and death so many years before his diagnosis.
Do we have everything to fear, including fear itself, as you have once said before?
We have everything to fear, including fear itself, and the bad news hasn't yet hit, I don't think.
I think you may be right.
We're born into a losing struggle. No one has ever beaten these odds. I've looked up ahead, or if you prefer, down the road. I know what's coming. I know no one beats these odds. And it's a matter of getting used to that and growing up and realizing that you're expelled from your mother's uterus as if shot from a cannon towards a barn door studded with old nail files and rusty hooks. It's a matter of how you use up the intervening time in an intelligent and ironic way, and try not to do anything ghastly to your fellow creatures. That leaves us with the question of why should we care? Somehow I'm glad that at least that bit of our innate nature is useful. But if we praise ourselves for what's innate, we're going to be praising a lot of very unpleasant things too. And there's no way around that. There's only the pretense that there's a way around.
So we do have everything to fear, including fear itself.
And to add, by the way, and also, if you ask me, I think we have free will. And how do I know that? Because we have no choice but to have free will.
That's one of the things I always liked about Hitchens. I think most of his fans enjoyed, is that he pulled no punches. And, there was a time I would have thought that was a pessimistic view of the world. It's a temporary life. It's all meaningless kind of thing. But Now, and I think Hitch would agree with this, when you see the temporary nature of our existence in a universe that really doesn't care one way or the other, then it's on us to make the most of the moments. It's on us to assign a sense of purpose and to not waste it. It was back in 2008 that Christopher Hitchens teamed up with a pastor, and they wrote a book called Is Christianity Good for the World? And of course, they each took opposing points of view. That book inspired a 2009 documentary film. And to promote the film, Christopher Hitchens and Pastor Douglas Wilson toured the United States. It was a debate and lecture tour, and they both ended up on headline news on the Joy Behar television talk show.
So let's talk about the Ten Commandments, for example. Do we really need the Ten Commandments to be good people? I mean, I know not to murder somebody. I didn't need to be raised Catholic, even though I was, to know that.
Right. Part of the problem that we come up against is that we have been inculcated in the Ten Commandments, the tenets of the Ten Commandments for many centuries.
Yeah.
And then we kick the ladder away. We've climbed up to this height, kick the ladder away and say, look how high we are. Well, I don't think it is self-evident that you shouldn't murder or commit adultery.
What did people do before the Ten Commandments? They didn't murder and kill otherwise we wouldn't be here.
Well, no, look at the crime rates. If sin disappeared overnight, if somebody waved a magic wand and sin disappeared, our economy would collapse. We are.
What do you say to that, Chris?
That doesn't maybe say anything. I have some tougher stuff to say. I mean,
go ahead.
Well, first, the story isn't true. I mean, the wandering in the desert, the exile.
That's all.
That's the Jewish version of the Christian mythology. It's worse than talking snakes. The Analects of Confucius, written long before, say to people what the golden rule is. Don't do to others what you wouldn't want done to yourself. Mm. The first 3 or 4 commandments are all saying you must fear someone you love, a heavenly dictator. They're not moral at all. Then there are 2 or 3 that are self-evident. Don't murder rather, don't steal, and don't commit perjury. And then the others are putting women on the level of beasts and saying they're among the chattels of your neighbor you mustn't covet. It's a Bronze Age, tribal, agricultural,
so the Ten Commandments were
code.
like in reruns, really.
Yeah. Well, let's go at this from another angle. Take the Code of Hammurabi and the Analects of Confucius and the Ten Commandments. An eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Well, eye for eye, tooth for tooth is lex talionis was given because it used to be before that a life for an eye, a life for a tooth. All right, strict justice was imposed to keep these things from escalating out of control. Mm-hmm. But the reason you have all these codes enforced by armies and police departments and that sort of thing is because people don't obey them naturally and spontaneously.
What do you say to that, Christopher?
For example, there's no commandment against genocide. There's no commandment against slavery, very common at the time. And no commandment saying parents should respect and be nice to their children. Why is this? Because in the next chapter, the so-called children of this terrifying God who exacts compulsory love are going to be ordered to commit genocide against the Amalekites and the Midianites and the Moabites. They're going to be ordered to enslave them, and they're going to be ordered to kill all their children in the name of God.
That's not very
don't
nice.
Have a commandment.
That's not very Christian.
So this is completely relativistic.
Also a part of that very same exchange, the question of who carries the burden of proof when it comes to God.
Who has the burden of proof? So does a Ford automobile have the burden of proof of demonstrating that there was a Henry Ford or that there wasn't? Who has the burden of proof? And a lot of this debate is actually scrambling for the high ground of who has to do the proving, who has to do the maintaining, who carries the burden of proof. Now,
who do you think carries the burden?
I believe the one who denies the self-evident fact that God exists and created the world. I think that is the person who has the burden of proof.
You say it's self-evident?
Yes, self-evident to those
who believe.
Those who believe. Those who don't believe, if you watch this movie, Collision, it's sort of like watching diving competitions in the Olympics. Mm-hmm. The Romanian judge comes up with a completely different score, 2 points, 10 points. So this is the sort of debate where atheists go to it and they think Christopher carried the day, and believers go to the debate and they think that the Christian guy did great.
There may not be a solution to this.
I think there is one. I mean, and I can't avail myself of the almost beautiful circularity of Pastor Wilson's argument. And I wouldn't want to shirk any burden of proof or disproof, but it does seem to me that if someone says, if I don't agree with them, I might be condemned to eternal punishment, and that snakes talk, virgins bear children and dead men walk, that extraordinary claims do require extraordinary evidence. What atheists say is not that there is no God. We couldn't possibly prove that. We say there's never been any evidence, there's never been a convincing philosophical argument that there is such an entity. In fact, we say there is no supernatural dimension. Mm-hmm. The natural world is much more wonderful.
But you don't, Pastor,
it's enough in itself.
You don't really believe that snakes talk and that Noah had all those animals on the boat, do you?
Yeah, I believe the Bible. I'm a Christian, so I believe the Bible.
But it sounds like you're too intelligent to really believe that literally. I understand your faith, but that all those animals were on the boat? Well, come on.
Come on. We're animals, and we
That's
talk.
a fact. We're primates.
And we talk.
Yeah.
By the way, that's an advance of where Presbyterianism used to be. They used to say we weren't primates. Now we know. Now everyone agrees we are. Now everyone agrees we evolved. Now everyone agrees that the cosmos was created by an explosion, probably without us in mind. And we're very likely not the object of divine design.
Okay.
It might be more modest to think that we aren't.
All right.
One of the things I would want to maintain is that Christians aren't going to make any headway by trying to split the difference between faith and unbelief. If you have unbelief and faith, and you split the difference, you just get a muddled form of faith or a muddled form of unbelief. I'm not interested in trying to dilute the Bible to make it acceptable to people.
Yeah.
So if I'm a Christian, then I do what Jesus says, believe what he taught, and that sort of thing. That's what a Christian should do.
What about this idea of Jesus, Christopher? You don't buy it at all, I take it.
Well, I don't think he was the Son of God.
You don't?
No, I don't think his mother was. I don't think his mother was a virgin, and I don't think he died and was resurrected or revived or resuscitated.
None of that.
None of that. And even if he was, by the way, any of those things, he would only have that in common: virginal birth, miraculous circumstances, mysterious death, with many, many other mythological figures. It wouldn't prove, even if it could be proved, wouldn't prove his doctrines were true or moral or ethical, which I don't think they are.
Does it surprise you to know that Einstein probably believed in God? That's pretty surprising.
No, I absolutely know that the contrary is true.
Well,
Einstein wrote very, very clearly he was a pantheist or possibly a deist. He did not believe in a personal God, a God of religion. He didn't believe in a God who could intervene in human affairs, would answer prayers, would take side in a war,
that's an interesting
would
point.
care what you ate or who you had sex with.
Now, you and I both heard it, right? Pastor Wilson is making a faith claim saying that, well, you can't water down faith. You have to believe on faith. Because if it's halfway, then it's not really faith. So I believe because it's true, and it's true because I believe it. But he would never, not once, allow an Islamist or a Hindu or somebody of another faith to use the same standard. They believe by faith. It's true because I believe it. I just know it in my heart. Pastor Wilson would not accept that, but he will accept it and stand on it for his own religion of Christianity. It's typical. Christopher Hitchens was not a fan of Mother Teresa. This was a change of perception in my own life. I actually was encouraged after I heard Hitchens criticize her. I was encouraged to go do my own digging on the subject, and I realized I was one of those people. One of those people who would rush to defend the character and reputation of Mother Teresa without knowing anything about her. I couldn't tell you anything except she was Catholic and she was born in Calcutta. And that's all I knew. Christopher Hitchens was asked about it back in March of 2011. This was 9 months before his death. He was interviewed by Steve Croft of 60 Minutes.
Well, you called Mother Teresa a fanatical...
a fundamentalist, a fanatic, and a fraud.
A fanatical Albanian dwarf.
Lying, thieving Albanian dwarf.
Lying, thieving Albanian dwarf.
That was, I admit, an exercise in seeing how far I could go.
But why did you want to do it?
It was about celebrity culture. Now, Mother Teresa started with a reputation of being a saint, and therefore everything she did had to be reported as saintly. Thus, the fact that she took money from the Duvalier family dictatorship in Haiti, who must have oppressed the poor more than any other dynasty in history, somehow wasn't a fact, because it couldn't be true, because a saint wouldn't do that.
What about Princess Diana?
Well, with Princess Diana...
I'm trying to remember what you said about Princess Diana.
Well,
compared her to a landmine.
Well, there's a horrible joke about a landmine, yes.
Yes.
She was in Angola on her landmine campaign. And there was a hushed, reverent BBC commentator who said, the thing about minefields is that they're very easy to lay, but they're very difficult and dangerous and even expensive to get rid of. And the perfect description of Prince Charles's first wife.
You wrote it. And it was printed.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I think the Lady Diana thing is another example of where Christopher Hitchens and I part ways. I know that she was far from a saint. There are many criticisms about the monarchy which are hugely relevant and valid. But, I see her story as one that deserves our sympathy. And say what you will about her, but she used her celebrity and influence to genuinely try to alleviate suffering, removing the landmines, that entire campaign being just one example. And I think that has merit and it deserves our sympathies. I don't think her tragic story belongs in the same conversation, or at least in the same context, of a Mother Teresa, someone who constantly spoke about the beauty of poverty while jet-setting on junk bond money and living like a rock star, while within her houses of the dying there were people handcuffed to beds and being given medications with syringes washed in tap water. Now, I don't think that those two examples exist in the same universe. I'm just saying.
Mother Teresa's flagship institution is her home for the dying, a hospice which purportedly sweetens the last moments of otherwise destitute lives.
My initial impression was of all the photographs and footage I've ever seen of Belsen and places like that, because all the patients had shaved heads. There are no chairs anywhere. There are just these stretcher beds, and they're like First World War stretcher beds. There's no garden, no yard even, no nothing. And I thought, what is this? This is 2 rooms with 50 to 60 men in one, 50 to 60 women in another. They're dying. They're not being given a great deal of medical care. They're not being given painkillers really beyond aspirin and maybe, if you're lucky, some Brufen or something for the sort of pain that goes with terminal cancer and the things that they were dying of. And I thought, what's the point?
Right from the very beginning, I wanted to serve the poor purely for the love of God and to give them what the rich people get with money. I wanted to give to the poor for the love of God.
They didn't have enough drips. The needles they used and reused over and over and over, and you would see some of the nuns rinsing needles under the cold water tap. And I asked one of them why she was doing it. And she said, well, to clean it. And I said, yes, but why are you not sterilizing it? Why are you not boiling water and sterilizing your needles? She says, there's no point. There's no time.
That's a clip from the 1994 documentary series, which was aired on Channel 4 in the UK. It was produced and hosted by Christopher Hitchens. It was about Mother Teresa, called Hell's Angel. And the female voice you heard was actually someone who had volunteered at Mother Teresa's Missionaries of Charity and had seen the atrocities taking place firsthand. Her name was Mary Loudon. But when this thing came out, people just exploded. Holy shit, you can't criticize Mother Teresa, right? Mother Teresa's a saint, this wonderful grandmotherly woman who just wants to help poor people and be charitable in the name of God. Christopher Hitchens was having none of it, and he helped to peel back the facade to reveal the hard reality behind the marketing campaign. And man, has the church been marketing Mother Teresa since whenever. Hitch was not a fan of the institution of the Catholic Church. He participated along with Stephen Fry debating against a couple of Catholic apologists. It was a debate that was sponsored by Intelligence Squared. The question was, is the Catholic Church a force for good in the world? And in the clip, Hitch was talking about how Pope John Paul II had to come forward a few decades ago and make apologies for centuries of atrocities committed by the Catholic Church.
If you're going to be a serious grown-up person and appear to defend the Catholic Church in public in front of an educated and literate audience, you simply have to start by making a great number of heartfelt apologies and requests for contrition and forgiveness. Now, you might ask, you're fully entitled to ask, brothers and sisters, who am I to say that? Well, in the Jubilee Millennium Year of 2000, the Vatican spokesman, Bishop Piero Marini, said, explaining a whole sermon of apology given by His Holiness the Pope, that was supposed to cover the entire history of the Church in its Jubilee year, that, I'll quote Bishop Marini directly, said, given the number of sins we've committed in the course of 20 centuries, reference to them must necessarily be rather summary. Well, I think Bishop Marini had that just about right. I'll have to be summary too, but I think he said just about the least of it. His Holiness on that occasion, it was March the 12th, 2000, if you wish to look it up, begged forgiveness for, among some other things, the Crusades, the Inquisition, the persecution of the Jewish people, injustice towards women, that's half the human race right there, and the forced conversion of indigenous peoples, especially in South America. And that followed a whole series of preceding apologies, or apologies, I would say, of a kind, made by the late Pope John Paul, who, it troubles me not at all to say, was a very impressive and serious human being. It followed no less than 94, count them, public recognitions on his part of appalling crime and error and cruelty and stupidity and offences to the free intelligence, ranging from, I shall be summary, like Bishop Marini, the African slave trade, apologized for in 1995. The admission that Galileo was right about the relationship between the sun and the earth and other orbs, which came in 1992, one might add. No, I won't say, it's too easy to say better late than never. Here, I said it. To violence and torture, legalized torture. Torture was legalized and institutionalized by the Roman pontiff during the Counter-Reformation. That came in 1995. And for silence during Hitler's final solution, or Shoah, as well as, in 1999, coming in just under the Millennium Jubilee wire, an apology for the burning alive in the main square of Prague of the great Czech Protestant Jan Hus. Since that big fiesta of forgiveness that began in, culminated, I might say, in 2000, fiesta of forgiveness, fiesta of asking for it, the papacy's also asked to be forgiven for the sack of Constantinople and the massacre of Byzantine Christianity in April 1204 as part of the Fourth Crusade, the anathema on all Eastern Orthodox Christians as unbelievers, heretics, and people dwelling outside the health of the Church was lifted only in 1964. I call your attention to that. He also expressed sorrow about the murder and forced conversion of Serbian Orthodox Christians in the Balkans during the Second World War. And it doesn't end there. There are smaller but significant, equally significant, avowals of a very bad conscience. These have included regret for the rape and the torture of orphans and other children in church-run schools in almost every country on earth, from Ireland to Australia. And I'm pleased to see that due reconsideration is now being given, and may in fact have been given, to the hellish, I choose the word carefully, Doctrine of Limbo, St. Augustine's cruel and stupid disposal problem solution to a non-existent problem, that is to say, the destination of the souls of unbaptized children. Up until now, Catholic parents have been taught that's where their unbaptized children went, a form of torture that's sometimes worse than the physical. Now it seems that this piece of Augustinian sadism is undergoing reconsideration as well. But remember, this is from a church that, on the whole, cannot err. We still await a more direct admission. For example, I give some suggestions of my own while we're at it. I would like them to take back the Concordat made with Adolf Hitler, the first treaty he ever signed, giving the Church a monopoly over education in Germany in exchange for the dissolution of the Catholic Centre Party to give the Nazi Party a clear run. I'd have apologized for the Lateran Pact with Mussolini, myself, also the first treaty ever signed by that fascist dictator. I would also think I'd want to reconsider the fact that Father Tiso, head of the Nazi puppet state in Slovakia, was a priest in holy orders, that the Croatian fascist puppet state, the Ustaša state of Ante Pavelic, was also operating under full clerical protection and disguise, as was the regime of General Franco and the dictator Antonio Salazar. And I really think I would beg forgiveness for this. I don't think the German church should have asked Hitler's birthday to be celebrated from the pulpit every year until he died.
Probably my second favorite debate took place back in 2008 at the Hauenstein Center for Presidential Studies. It was April 3rd, 2008, as Christopher Hitchens debated his own brother, English journalist and author Peter Hitchens, who's a political conservative and an evangelical Christian. So these two brothers exist in the same universe, and it's kind of awesome. And they're on stage and they're clashing against each other. And I'm going to play a longer soundbite here in just a second, but the debate is worth watching, if nothing else, for the soul exchange where Christopher Hitchens is talking about the obscenity of admiring the biblical Abraham, the blindly obedient servant of God who was prepared to take a knife to his own son's throat.
Let alone to the number of boy children who die every year because of the covenant, the hideous covenant that's imposed upon them by Mosaic law, which also, I might add, celebrates every year, in all three monotheisms, the decision of a father to put his knife to his son's throat, because that's how much he loves the dictator. Now, I find this wicked, and I won't have my belief called frivolous. And any one of you who's prepared to show how much you love God and appreciate true north by holding a knife to your firstborn's throat to prove your devotion can stand up now or be regarded by my brother as someone who's not morally serious. And now you see the depth to which, now you see the depth into which religion wants to throw you.
I don't know if you could really hear it, but Peter Hitchens is on the other side of the stage. He's about to pop an O-ring over there, and he was saying the knife wasn't used. Right? I mean, no, of course it wasn't traumatizing to the child that he was almost murdered by his father. Of course it's a reasonable request because at the end of the day, the murder was not carried out. This is Peter Hitchens in microcosm, I think. But another clip that I found really interesting, Christopher Hitchens during this debate goes even deeper into why the idea of a totalitarian religion, a high-control authoritarian religion like Christianity, Islam, etc., are such terrible and immoral ideas. Here's what he said.
You may wish to be a deist, as my heroes Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine were, and you may not wish to abandon the idea that there must be some sort of first or proximate cause or prime mover of the known and observable world and universe. But even if you can get yourself to that position, which we unbelievers maintain is always subject to better and more perfect and more elegant explanations, even if you can get yourself to that position, all your work is still ahead of you. To go from being a deist to a theist, in other words, from someone who says, God cares about you, knows who you are, minds what you do, answers your prayers, cares which bits of your penis or clitoris you saw away or have sawn away for you, minds who you go to bed with and in what way, minds what holy days you observe, minds what you eat, minds what positions you use for pleasure. All your work is still ahead of you, and lots of luck. Because there's nobody, even Aquinas had to give it up. There's no one who can move from the first position to the second. So I could, and I'm actually strongly tempted to, I could leave it right there. But then it's not in my nature to let off a captive audience so easily. So I'll add a couple of things. The reasons why I am glad this is not true would, I suppose, be the gravamen of my case. Some people I know who are atheists will say they wish they could believe it. Some people I know who are former believers say they wish they could have their old faith back. They miss it. I don't understand this at all. I think it's an excellent thing that there's no reason to believe in the absurd propositions I just admittedly rather briefly rehearsed to you. The main reason for this, I think, is that it is a totalitarian belief. It is the wish to be a slave. It is the desire that there be an unalterable, unchallengeable, tyrannical authority who can convict you of thought crime while you are asleep, who can subject you, who must indeed subject you, to a total surveillance around the clock, every waking and sleeping minute of your life, I say of your life, before you're born, and even worse, and where the real fun begins, after you're dead. A celestial North Korea. Who wants this to be true? Who but a slave desires such a ghastly fate? I've been to North Korea. It has a dead man as its president. Kim Jong-il is only head of the party and head of the army. He's not head of the government or the state. That office belongs to his deceased father, Kim Il-sung. It's a necrocracy. A thanatocracy. It's one short of a trinity, I might add. The son is the reincarnation of the father. It is the most revolting and utter and absolute and heartless tyranny the human species has ever evolved. But at least you can fucking die and leave North Korea. Does the Quran or the Bible offer you that liberty? No. No. The tyranny, the misery, the utter ownership of your entire personality, the smashing of your individuality only begins at the point of death. This is evil. This is a wicked preachment.
I've got lots more to come. Sound bites from the late Christopher Hitchens, as he has been gone 10 years this month. We will continue with more right after this. If you want to give a Christmas gift to this broadcast, become a patron. I would be so thankful for your support. You get the broadcast a couple days early, and you get it totally commercial-free. Patreon.com/Seth Andrews. We continue to remember Christopher Hitchens 10 years after we lost him, December 15th of 2011. Near the end of the broadcast, I'm going to read for you the afterword in the book Mortality that was published the year after we lost Hitch. And again, that book features 7 different essays that were originally published in Vanity Fair, but the afterword was written by Carol Blue, the widow of Christopher Hitchens, as she speaks about her husband in her own words. And I was just so moved by what she said. I want to read those words on the broadcast for you in just a few. Here's some typical Hitchens fireworks. This was back from the Connecticut Forum in 2009. Hitch is on stage with several people, including a rabbi, Rabbi Harold Kushner, and they got into it on the issue of circumcision.
There are things that a normal, morally normal, even a very morally average or mediocre person would not, unprompted, do. For example, hold down their daughter at the age of 6, tear off her underwear, and cut her genitalia with a sharp stone. They wouldn't do that if they didn't think God was telling them to do it, or the mullahs, or if it's a boy, the rabbis weren't telling them to do it. One of the reasons why I have the lurid subtitle I do, my book, Religion is a Poison, is that it makes ordinary moral people, compels them, forces them, in some cases orders them to do disgusting, wicked, unforgivable things. There's no expiation for the generations of misery and suffering that religion has inflicted in this way and continues to inflict, and I still haven't heard enough apology for it.
Rabbi, you want to do something?
Christopher, I've got to call you down on referring to circumcision as genital mutilation. My son cried more at his first haircut than he did at his bris. And statistically...
You weren't doing it right then.
Statistically, the only long-term effect that it seems to have on people is it increases their chances of winning a Nobel Prize.
I can't find the compulsory mutilation of the genitals of children a subject for humor in that way, or flippancy in that way. Maimonides says very plainly that it's designed to repress sexual pleasure, to deprive us, a male child as far as possible of the opportunity of that. The full excision, not just the snip or the full mandatory covenant is fantastically painful, leads to trauma, leads to the dulling of the sexual relationship, and can be in itself life-threatening at that moment. We have the records, I can show them to you, of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds in the United States, boy babies who've died or had life-threatening infections as a result of this disgusting practice. That a person as humane as yourself can sit here and think of that as a fit subject for humor shows what I mean. Religion makes morally normal people say and do disgusting and wicked things, and you've just proved my point for me. Shame on you for saying what you just said. Shame on you for saying it about your own son, my God.
Let's move on.
Yes, let's.
What next? Cutting the labia of little girls. At least Judaism doesn't do that.
This is a question.
What if a Muslim was to say to you just now, my little girl cried more at her first haircut than when I cut off her clitoris? What would you think of me if I was to say such a disgusting thing?
Well,
remember, we are not talking about detail here. We're talking about whether religion makes people behave better or not.
Let's give the rabbi a chance. I wanted to move on, but let's give the rabbi a chance to respond to what you said, because it got pretty personal here. So,
again, my experience in my own son, my own grandson, hundreds of congregants, has been that it's not nothing like what you're talking about, and that for whatever reason that this has become an issue for you, I just think is excessive.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
That I'm more personally...
There's an undertone of innuendo to this. Let's bring it on.
No, there's no innuendo there. What I'm saying is,
sure,
I've lived through this personally, and...
You've inflicted it, is what you're saying.
I've been what?
You've inflicted it, or officiated at it, is what you're saying, isn't it?
Well, officiated, yes. Inflicted, no.
A few more clips, and I think appropriately some clips nearing the end of Hitch's life as he was speaking more in retrospective. He was getting reflective and kind of looking back on his life and talking about his journey through esophageal cancer in a very candid way. This clip is from BBC's Newsnight program hosted by Jeremy Paxman. This was about a year before Christopher Hitchens died. He'd already been going through chemo. He'd lost all of his hair. He'd lost quite a bit of weight. But he was being interviewed in his home and asked in this clip about Islam.
Conflict is intrinsic to human history.
Yes.
And there will be some further conflict. Many people say it has already begun, and it's the conflict between the West and sort of Islamofascism. Do you think that is a conflict which can be lost by the West?
Well, first on conflict, you're completely right. It's unavoidable, and I'm glad of that because I think it's desirable. Especially in the United States, there's a huge privilege given to the word unity or unification, partly because it's a very various and multifarious society. There's a big need for good manners. But if you say, I'm a unifier, not a divider, you expect and you usually get applause. I'm a divider. I think only division can cause progress. People say the politics of division. Politics is division by definition. If there was no disagreement, if there was no fight, there'd be no politics. So the illusion of unity isn't worth having, and anyway is unattainable. What I do think of as the greatest crisis, greatest conflict at present it's a version of the old conflict, which is between totalitarianism and free thought, which is, in other words, between theocracy and the Enlightenment. And the form in which this is currently being played out, you could define as the West versus Islam, but it's not quite so. Within many Islamic countries, there are people who have a greater respect for pluralism than there are people in Britain who would like to censor me for criticizing Islam, for example. But roughly you described the outlines correctly. Yes, I refuse to be told what to think or how, let alone what to say or write by anybody, but most certainly not by people who claim the authority of fabricated works of primeval myth and fiction and want me to believe that these are divine. That I won't have. That's the original repudiation. The first rebellion against mental slavery comes from saying, this is man-made, it's not divine.
And to be clear about what you're talking about here, you're talking about the Bible and the Quran.
Yeah, well, and the Torah, yes, yeah.
All of these are works of fiction.
All of these are depraved works of man-made fiction, yeah.
And in what way does saying that you find the Quran laughable in places, in what way does that help the spread of reason?
Oh, well, I think mockery of religion is one of the most essential things, because to demystify supposedly holy texts that are dictated by God and show that they are man-made, what you have to show their internal inconsistencies and absurdities. And one of the beginnings of human emancipation is the ability to laugh at authority. It's an indispensable thing. People can call it blasphemy if they like, but if they call it that, they have to assume that there's something to be blasphemed, some divine word. Well, I don't accept the premise.
Jeremy Paxman had another interesting question for Hitch about, this just in case. What if there is actually a God? Don't you want to sort of take your poker chips and push them over here on the table just in case? Here's how that went.
A lot of people in your position might take Pascal's wager. They might say, I don't know whether I'm right or wrong.
Yes.
But if I accept the possibility of there being a purpose and a God, I can't lose either way, because if there isn't, I've lost nothing, and if there is, I gain.
Yes.
Why haven't you done that?
Well, I thought about Pascal's wager and wrote about it in my book long before I became possibly mortally sick. And what I said about it was this. Shall we just quickly state what it says?
Yes, please.
Well, Pascal was a great mathematician and one of the founders of probability theory, actually. I think it's his lowest point is what's called his wager, or sometimes his gambit, where he says, rather like a huckster, what have you got to lose? You win everything if you bet on God, and you've everything to lose if you're wrong. Well, what does this involve, if it's correct? It involves a very cynical God, and a rather stupid one, who will say, I noticed you make a profession of faith just there, and I also, because I'm God, I know why you did, because it was in the hope of winning favor with me. Well, that's fine. You'll therefore get it. That seems to me a rather contemptible thing, and necessarily, therefore, to entail a rather contemptible human being who says, I don't really believe this, I have no faith, but what can I lose by pretending to God that I do? I might get a break. I mean, this is pretty low, isn't it? If I'm surprised to find, when I pass on from this vale of tears, that I'm facing a tribunal, which you notice, by the way, you're not allowed to bring a lawyer. There's no jury. There's no appeal. I mean, this is altogether unattractive. Why people want it to be believed their God is this way, I don't know. But suppose that I'm there. It may be a one-person tribunal, depending on your view of the Trinity. I would say, I hope you noticed that I didn't try and curry favor, that I was honestly unable to believe in the claims made by your human spokespersons. Now do I get any understanding? And if that doesn't work, well, then I don't know what would. But I'm not going to try anything servile. I'm resolved on that point.
It would be more comforting, wouldn't it? And more comfortable.
Which, the servile? No.
To make an accommodation, to have some belief in a possibility of this not being the end.
Well, as long as I don't have to take the word of other humans on what are the necessary propitiations and gestures and subjections I have to submit myself to in order to qualify. In other words, there are many, many discrepant religions, all of whom say only if I support them or endorse them will I qualify. Well, now, I don't know that there is no such thing as consciousness without the brain, for example, that there's no such survival. I'd very much doubt it. But let's say we don't know enough to say it's impossible. I would say what is impossible is that other humans can know what the conditions are whereby you qualify for survival. That I do know is false.
Do you fear death?
No, I'm not afraid of being dead, that's to say. There's nothing to be afraid of. I won't know I'm dead. In my strong conviction, I won't. And if I find that I'm alive in any way at all, well, that'll be a pleasant surprise, and I quite like surprises.
When I was reading the book Mortality, this compilation of Vanity Fair essays published the year after Hitch's death, I was struck again by his words and how nobody could string a sentence together like Christopher Hitchens. But I was also struck by the afterword, which was written by Hitchens' widow, Carol Blue, and what a beautiful writer she is as well. And in the afterward, she wrote about her husband, and here's what she said. She said, "On stage, my husband was an impossible act to follow. If you ever saw him at the podium, you may not share Richard Dawkins' assessment that he was the greatest orator of our time. But you'll know what I mean, or at least you won't think she would say that. She's his wife." Offstage, my husband was an impossible act to follow. At home, at one of the raucous, joyous, impromptu, 8-hour dinners we often found ourselves hosting, where the table was so crammed with ambassadors, hacks, political dissidents, college students, and children that elbows were colliding, and it was hard to find the space to put down a glass of wine, my husband would rise to give a toast that could go on for a stirring, spellbinding, hysterically funny 20 minutes of poetry and limerick reciting, a call to arms for a cause, and jokes. How good it is to be us, he would say in his perfect voice. My husband is an impossible act to follow. And yet now I must follow him. I have been forced to have the last word. It was the sort of early summer evening in New York when all you can think of is living. It was June 8th, 2010 to be exact, the first day of his American book tour. I ran as fast as I could down East 93rd Street, suffused with joy and excitement at the sight of him in his white suit. He was dazzling. He was also dying, though we didn't know it yet. And we wouldn't know it for certain until the day of his death. Earlier that day, he had taken a detour from his book launch to a hospital because he thought he was having a heart attack. By the time I saw him standing at the stage entrance of the 92nd Street Y that evening, he and I, and we alone, knew he might have cancer. We embraced in a shadow that only we saw and chose to defy. We were euphoric. He lifted me up, and we laughed. We went into the theater, where he conquered yet another audience. We managed to get through a jubilant dinner in his honor, and set out on a stroll back to our hotel through the perfect Manhattan night, walking more than 50 blocks. Everything was as it should be, except that it wasn't. We were living in two worlds. The old one, which never seemed more beautiful, had not yet vanished, and the new one, about which we knew little except to fear it, had not yet arrived. The new world lasted 19 months. During this time of what he called living dyingly, he insisted ferociously on living, and his constitution, physical and philosophical, did all it could to stay alive. Christopher was aiming to be among the 5 to 20% of those who could be cured. The odds depended on what doctor we talked to and how they interpreted the scans. Without ever deceiving himself about his medical condition, and without ever allowing me to entertain illusions about his prospects for survival, he responded to every bit of clinical and statistical good news with a radical, childlike hope. His will to keep his existence intact, to remain engaged with his preternatural history, was spectacular. Thanksgiving was his favorite holiday, and I watched with awe as he organized, even as he was sick from the effects of the chemotherapy, a grand family gathering in Toronto with all his children and his father-in-law on the eve of an important debate with Tony Blair about religion. This was an occasion orchestrated by a man who told me in the hotel suite that night that this would probably be his last Thanksgiving. Not long before, back in Washington, on a bright and balmy Indian summer afternoon, he excitedly summoned his family and visiting friends on an outing to see the Origins of Man exhibition at the Museum of Natural History, where I watched him sprint out of a cab and up the granite steps to throw up in a trash can before leading his charges through the galleries and exuberantly impressing us with the attainments of science and reason. Christopher's charisma never left him. Not in any realm, not in public, not in private, not even in the hospital. He made a party of it, transforming the sterile, chilly, neon-lighted, humming and beeping and blinking room into a study and a salon. His artful conversation never ceased. The constant interruptions, the poking and prodding, the sample-taking, the breathing treatments, the IV bags being changed, nothing kept him from holding court, making a point or an argument or hitting a punchline for his guests. He listened and drew us out and had us all laughing, He was always asking for and commenting on another newspaper, another magazine, another novel, another review copy. We stood around his bed and reclined on plastic upholstered chairs as he made us into participants in his Socratic discourses. One night he was coughing up blood and was wheeled into the ICU for a hastily scheduled bronchoscopy. I alternated between watching over him and sleeping in a convertible chair. We lay side by side in our single beds. At one point, we both woke up and started burbling like children at a sleepover party. At the time, this was the best it was going to get. When he came to following the bronchoscopy, after the doctor told him the trouble in his windpipe was not cancer, but rather pneumonia, he was still intubated, but avidly scribbling notes and questions about every conceivable subject. I saved the pages of paper on which he wrote his side of the conversation. There are sweet nothings and a picture he drew on the top of the first page, and then, pneumonia? What type? Am I cancer-free? Pain is hard to remember right now, 4 to 5. He asked after the children and my father. How's Edwin? Tell him I ask. I worry about him, 'cause I love him. I want to hear him. Slightly down the page, he wrote what he wanted me to bring him from our guest house in Houston. Nietzsche, Mencken, and Chesterton books, plus all random bits paper, maybe in one hold-all bag. Look in the drawers, bedside, etc., up and downstairs. That night, a dear family friend arrived from New York and was in the room when, in one of his nocturnal interludes of wakefulness and energy, Christopher flashed an open, wide smile around the tube still running down his throat and wrote on his clipboard, I'm staying here in Houston until I'm cured, and then I'm taking our families on a vacation to Bermuda. The next morning, after they took the tube out, I came into his room to find him smiling his fox-like grin at me. Happy anniversary, he called out. A nurse came in with a small white cake, paper plates, and plastic forks. Another wedding anniversary. We're reading the newspaper on the terrace in our suite in a New York hotel. It's a faultless fall day. Our 2-year-old daughter is sitting contentedly beside us drinking a bottle. She climbs off her chair and squats down, inspecting something on the ground. She pulls the bottle out of her mouth, calls to me, and points to a large, motionless bumblebee. She is alarmed, shaking her head back and forth as if to say, No, no, no. The bee stopped, she says. Then she makes a command, Make it start. Back then, she believed I had the power to reanimate the dead. I don't recall what I said to her about the bee. What I do recall are the words, Make it start. Christopher then lifted her into his lap and consoled and distracted her with a change of subject and humor, just as he would with all of his children so many years later when he was ill. I miss his perfect voice. I heard it day and night, night and day. I missed the first happy trills when he woke, the low octaves of his morning voice as he read me snippets from the newspaper that outraged or amused him, the delighted and irritated, mostly irritated, registers as I interrupted him while he read, the jazz-tone riffs of him talking down the line to a radio station from the kitchen phone as he cooked lunch, his chirping high-note greeting when our daughter came home from school, and his last soothing pianissimo chatterings on retiring late at night. I miss, as his readers must, his writer's voice, his voice on the page. I miss the unpublished Hitch, the countless notes he left for me in the entryway, on my pillow, the emails he would send while we sat in different rooms in our apartment or in our place in California, and the emails he sent when he was on the road. And I miss his handwritten communiques, his innumerable letters and postcards. We date back to the time of the epistle, and his faxes, the thrill of receiving Christopher's instant dispatches as he checked in from a dicey spot on some other continent. The first time Christopher went public and wrote about his illness for Vanity Fair, he was ambivalent about it. He was intent on protecting our family's privacy. He was living the topic, and he didn't want it to become all-encompassing. He didn't want to be defined by it. He wanted to think and write in a sphere apart from sickness. He had made a pact with his editor and chum, Graydon Carter, that he would write about anything except sports, and he kept that promise. He had often put himself in the frame, but now he was the ultimate subject of the story. His last words of the unfinished fragmentary jottings at the end of this little book may seem to trail off, but in fact they were written on his computer in bursts of energy and enthusiasm, as he sat in the hospital using his food tray for a desk. When he was admitted to the hospital for the last time, we thought it would be for a brief stay. He thought, we all thought, he'd have the chance to write the longer book that was forming in his mind. His intellectual curiosity was sparked by genomics and the cutting-edge proton radiation treatments he underwent, and he was encouraged by the prospect that his case could contribute to future medical breakthroughs. He told an editor friend waiting for an article, "Sorry for the delay, I'll be back home soon." He told me he couldn't wait to catch up on all the movies he'd missed and to see the King Tut exhibition in Houston, our temporary residence. The end was unexpected. At home in Washington, I pulled books off the shelves, out of the book towers on the floor, off the stacks of volumes on tables. Inside the back covers are notes written in his hand that he took for reviews and for himself. Piles of his papers and notes lie on surfaces all around the apartment, some of which were taken from his suitcase that I brought back from Houston. At any time I can peruse our library or his notes and rediscover and recover him. When I do, I hear him, and he has the last word. Time after time, Christopher has the last word. The words of Christopher Hitchens' widow, Carol Blue, written in Washington, D.C. in June of 2012. I can think of no better way to finish the broadcast than to play this clip from the November 18th, 2010 debate that happened at Prestonwood Baptist Church, big megachurch in Dallas, Texas. The debate was between Christopher Hitchens and William Dembski. This was near the end of the debate, and I just love this segment so much that I actually grabbed a part of it and incorporated it into the now familiar intro for the Thinking Atheist podcast. Christopher Hitchens, November 18th, 2010, at Prestonwood Baptist Church. The final words of the broadcast today will be his, and thank you so much for listening.
I'll close on the implied question that Bill asked me earlier. Why don't you accept this wonderful offer? Why wouldn't you like to meet Shakespeare, for example? I mean, I don't know if you really think that when you die you can be corporeally reassembled and have conversations with authors from previous epochs. It's not necessary that you believe that in Christian theology, and I have to say it sounds like a complete fairy tale to me. The only reason I want to meet Shakespeare, or might even want to, is because I can meet him any time, because he is immortal in the works he's left behind. If you've read those, meeting the author would almost certainly be a disappointment. But when Socrates was sentenced to death for his philosophical investigations and for blasphemy, for challenging the gods of the city, and he accepted his death, he did say, well, if we are lucky, perhaps I'll be able to hold conversation with other great thinkers and philosophers and doubters too. In other words, that the discussion about what is good, what is beautiful, what is noble, what is pure and what is true could always go on. Why is that important? Why would I like to do that? Because that's the only conversation worth having. And whether it goes on or not after I die, I don't know. But I do know that it's the conversation I want to have while I'm still alive. Which means that to me, the offer of certainty, the offer of complete security, the offer of an impermeable faith that can't give way, is an offer of something not worth having. I want to live my life taking the risk all the time that I don't know anything like enough yet, that I haven't understood enough, that I can't know enough, that I'm always hungrily operating on the margins of a potentially great harvest of future knowledge and wisdom. I wouldn't have it any other way. And I'd urge you to look at those of you who tell you, those people who tell you at your age that you're dead till you believe as they do. What a terrible thing to be telling to children. And that you can only live, and that you can only live by accepting an absolute authority. Don't think of that as a gift. Think of it as a poisoned chalice. Push it aside, however tempting it is. Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. For a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming free thought events and conventions, log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.